Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to bring the family together. The turkey roasted golden, the table glittered with wine glasses, and laughter floated through the room. But when my mother-in-law stood to raise her glass, the door to a past my husband never told me about swung wide open, and what followed left everyone breathless, trembling, and forever changed. That night, beneath the warm glow of candlelight, I discovered that some family gatherings aren't about gratitude at all. They're about power, betrayal, and the moment when you finally decide you've had enough. My name is Rachel Monroe, and at 36, I thought I'd mastered the art of navigating difficult family dynamics. As a senior associate at Ashford and Blake LLP in Lakewood, Pennsylvania, I'd negotiated with hostile corporate executives and mediated bitter divorces. But standing in my kitchen that November morning, watching the steam rise from my third cup of coffee, I felt my hands tremble at the thought of another Thanksgiving with my mother-in-law, Evelyn Carter. The casserole dish I'd spent hours perfecting sat on the marble countertop, its foil covering reflecting the pale autumn light. Sweet potato with a brown sugar crust, Evelyn's recipe. Naturally. She'd made it clear during my first Thanksgiving with the family that my grandmother's green bean casserole was too pedestrian for the Carter table. That was 7 years ago, and I'd learned since then to swallow my pride along with whatever elaborate dishes she deemed acceptable. Daniel found me staring at the casserole, lost in thought. "You okay?" he asked, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. Even on holidays, my husband maintained that polished attorney-look crisp white shirt, perfectly styled dark hair, the kind of conventional handsomeness that had first caught my attention at a legal conference 8 years ago. "Just thinking," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He sighed. That particular exhale I'd come to recognize as his mother-related resignation. "She doesn't mean anything by it, Rachel. That's just how she is. Just how she is." I'd heard that phrase so many times it had become white noise, an excuse that covered everything from Evelyn's backhanded compliments about my appearance to her constant reminders that Daniel's previous girlfriends had all come from more established families, more established code for old money, something my middle-class upbringing in Ohio could never provide. "We should leave by 4:30, Daniel said, already moving toward his study. "Traffic will be murder if we wait any longer." 4:30. That gave me 2 more hours to armor myself with professional composure, to practice my polite smile in the mirror, to remind myself that this was just one evening in a marriage I'd fought to preserve despite Evelyn's 1,000 small acts of sabotage. I thought about the first time I'd met her, how her pale blue eyes had swept over me with the efficiency of a scanner, cataloging every perceived flaw. My dress designer, but last season. My jewelry real, but modest. My laugh too loud, too genuine, too unrestrained for the rarefied atmosphere of the Carter family estate. "You're in law, I hear," she'd said, making it sound like I worked at a drive-through legal clinic. When I'd mentioned Ashford and Blake, one of Lakewood's most prestigious firms, she'd merely hummed and changed the subject to Daniel's ex-girlfriend, a surgeon who'd just published research in some medical journal. The worst part wasn't the criticism, it was the subtlety of it all. Evelyn Carter had perfected the art of the silk-wrapped dagger, every insult cushioned in concern, every comparison framed as innocent observation. "Oh, Rachel, you're wearing your hair straight today? It's so brave of you not to worry about volume at your age." Or, my personal favorite, "Daniel's father and I were just saying how refreshing it is that you're so uncomplicated." My phone buzzed with a text from my sister in Ohio. "Good luck tonight. Remember, you're better than all of them." If only it were that simple. The truth was, I loved Daniel despite his weakness when it came to his mother. I saw glimpses of the man he could be when we were alone, away from Evelyn's gravitational pull. But every family gathering pulled him back into her orbit, reducing him to the dutiful son who couldn't seem to find his voice when his mother decided to use me for target practice. I walked to our bedroom and surveyed my outfit options. The burgundy dress Evelyn had complimented last year, but was that before or after she'd mentioned it made me look healthier than usual. The black ensemble that Daniel loved, but Evelyn had said made me look like I was attending a funeral. Every choice felt like a potential mistake, a chance for her to find new ways to remind me that I wasn't quite right, wasn't quite enough, wasn't quite the daughter-in-law she'd envisioned for her precious Daniel. As I held up each dress, I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror. 36 years old, successful career, a marriage that should have been happy. When had I become this person who spent hours strategizing for a family dinner like it was a court case I couldn't afford to lose? The answer came immediately the day I'd said "I do" and officially became part of the Carter family, with Evelyn as its undisputed matriarch. She ruled through a combination of old money, social connections, and an uncanny ability to make everyone around her feel simultaneously grateful for her attention and terrified of losing it. Tonight would be no different, I told myself as I finally selected the burgundy dress. Another Thanksgiving of careful navigation, measured responses, and pretending not to notice the photographs of Daniel's ex-girlfriends that Evelyn still kept displayed in the study. Another evening of being reminded, in ways both subtle and sharp, that I was an outsider who'd somehow stolen my way into their golden circle. What I didn't know, as I zipped up the dress and prepared my smile, was that tonight Evelyn had something special planned. Tonight, the silk gloves would come off, and I would finally understand just how far my mother-in-law would go to reclaim her son. The Carter estate loomed before us as Daniel pulled into the circular driveway, its colonial facade bathed in the golden glow of strategically placed landscape lighting. Even after 7 years, the house still made me feel like I was approaching a fortress rather than a family home. 3 stories of pristine white brick and black shutters, with a front door that seemed designed to remind visitors of their place in the hierarchy. "Looks like everyone's here already," Daniel muttered, surveying the collection of luxury vehicles, his brother Marcus's Tesla, his sister Patricia's Range Rover, and several other cars I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. Unfamiliar cars meant Evelyn had invited additional guests, her bridge club friends. Perhaps, or business associates, more people to witness whatever subtle humiliations she had planned. The door opened before we could knock. Evelyn stood there in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, her silver hair styled in an elegant chignon that emphasized her aristocratic cheekbones. At 62, she remained a striking woman, the kind who could command a room with a single raised eyebrow. "Daniel, darling," she purred, pulling him into an embrace that lasted just long enough to remind me who came first. Then her pale eyes shifted to me, and her smile cooled by several degrees. "Rachel, how punctual." She said it like punctuality was a character flaw, something the lower classes did because they lacked the confidence to arrive fashionably late. I handed her the casserole dish, which she passed to their housekeeper, Margaret, without looking at it. "Everyone's in the living room," she said, leading us through the foyer with its intimidating chandelier and gallery of Carter family portraits. I noticed a new addition, a photo of Daniel from what looked like a medical conference. Standing next to him, laughing at something off camera, was a woman I didn't recognize. Blonde, statuesque, wearing the kind of understated jewelry that whispered rather than shouted its value. The living room hummed with conversation that died the moment we entered. Marcus looked up from his scotch with that smirk I'd grown to despise. "Well, look who made it. We were just talking about you. Rachel. All good things. I hope," I managed, accepting a glass of wine from a server I didn't recognize. Evelyn had hired staff for the evening, another way to emphasize the grandeur of the occasion. Patricia, Daniel's sister, exchanged a look with her husband, Richard. That made my skin prickle. She'd never liked me, had made that clear from day one when she'd asked if I was Daniel's rebound from his last serious relationship. "We were just discussing the Riverside Club's charity auction," Evelyn said, settling into her throne-like wingback chair. Patricia's donation raised $30,000. The hospital wing will have a plaque with her name. That's wonderful, I said, knowing this was a prelude to something. Yes, it's so important to give back when you've been fortunate, Evelyn continued, her gaze lingering on my dress, which suddenly felt cheaper than ever. Of course, not everyone has the means to make such contributions. We must all do what we can within our circumstances. Before I could respond, the doorbell chimed. Evelyn's face lit up with an expression I'd never seen before: genuine delight. "Oh, that must be our special guests," she said, rising with surprising energy. "Daniel, darling, would you—" Daniel stood automatically, that programmed response to his mother's requests that bypassed conscious thought. I watched him go, noting how Patricia and Marcus seemed to share some secret knowledge, their eyes bright with anticipation. The voices from the foyer reached us before I could see who'd arrived. A laugh, feminine, musical, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. Then Daniel's voice, surprised and warm in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Julia, I had no idea you were coming." Julia. The name hit me like cold water. Julia Sanders, the woman whose photos still decorated Evelyn's study. The ex-girlfriend who'd almost become Daniel's wife before she'd taken a job in Switzerland 5 years ago. The one Evelyn still referred to as the one who got away. She entered the room like she'd never left, all elegant confidence and easy grace. Her emerald dress complemented her blonde hair perfectly, and the diamond earrings she wore caught the light with every movement. Behind her walked an older couple I didn't recognize, but their resemblance to Julia was unmistakable. Her parents. "Rachel," Julia said, approaching me with a smile that seemed genuinely friendly, which somehow made it worse. "It's so lovely to finally meet you. Evelyn's told me so much about you." I stood to shake her hand, noting how everyone watched us like spectators at a tennis match. "Julia, I've heard a lot about you too." "All ancient history," she laughed, but her eyes remained on Daniel, who stood frozen between us like a deer in headlights. "I hope we can be friends. After all, we have so much in common." The way she said it, the slight emphasis on "so much," made it clear she wasn't just talking about Daniel. This was a woman who'd spent holidays in this house, who knew which fork to use for every course, who had Evelyn's approval in ways I never would. "Julia's parents are considering moving to Lakewood," Evelyn announced, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "They've been looking at houses in the Riverside district. Isn't that wonderful? We'll all be neighbors." "How nice," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. Marcus raised his glass. "This calls for a toast, to old friends returning home." Everyone lifted their glasses except me. I stood there, watching Daniel clink glasses with his ex-girlfriend, while his mother looked on with the satisfaction of a chess player who'd just positioned her queen. "Rachel, you're not drinking," Patricia observed with false concern. "Are you feeling all right?" I looked at my untouched wine, then at the circle of faces around me. They'd all known she was coming. This had been planned, orchestrated, designed for maximum impact. Even Daniel might have known the way he'd avoided eye contact all day suddenly made sense. "I'm fine," I said, raising my glass belatedly. "To old friends." The wine tasted bitter on my tongue, but not as bitter as the realization that I'd walked into an ambush disguised as a holiday dinner. The evening stretched ahead, full of landmines I couldn't see but could feel beneath every step. And somewhere in this room, behind the polite smiles and careful conversations, a plan was unfolding that would either break me or finally teach me how to fight back. Dinner was announced at 7:30, and we filed into the dining room like actors taking our positions for a carefully rehearsed play. The table gleamed with the Carter family china delicate pieces with gold trim that Evelyn never failed to mention had been in the family for 4 generations. The seating arrangement told me everything I needed to know about the evening's intended narrative. Julia sat directly across from Daniel, with her parents flanking her. I'd been placed at Daniel's right, but somehow the arrangement made me feel like an afterthought, a +1 who'd been squeezed in at the last minute. Evelyn presided at the head of the table, surveying her kingdom with the satisfaction of a general who'd successfully deployed her troops. "Julia was just telling us about her work in Zurich," Patricia said as the first course was served. "She's heading up the entire European division now." "It's really not that impressive," Julia demurred, but her false modesty fooled no one. "The pharmaceutical industry has been very good to me." "Very good indeed," Evelyn agreed, her eyes sliding to me. "Rachel, didn't you mention once that you'd considered international law? Such a shame you never pursued it." I hadn't mentioned it. Daniel had, years ago, explaining why I'd chosen corporate law instead. The stability, the desire to stay close to my family in Ohio. Evelyn had filed away that information like ammunition, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it. "I'm quite happy with my practice at Ashford and Blake," I said evenly. "Of course you are," Julia said warmly. Too warmly. "Local firms can be so cozy." The word hung in the air like an insult wrapped in silk. Marcus snorted into his wine, and Patricia didn't even try to hide her smile. As the main course arrived, a perfectly bronzed turkey that Evelyn carved with ceremonial precision, the conversation turned to memories. Every story, every anecdote, seemed carefully chosen to highlight a time before me, a golden era when Julia and Daniel were the couple everyone assumed would last forever. "Remember that Christmas in Aspen?" Marcus laughed. "When you two got lost skiing and we had to send out the resort patrol." Daniel's face colored slightly. "That was a long time ago." "Not that long," Julia said softly, her eyes meeting his. "Some things feel like yesterday." I pushed food around my plate, my appetite evaporating with each shared memory, each inside joke I couldn't understand. The worst part was watching Daniel slowly relax into these reminiscences, his shoulders loosening, his laugh becoming more genuine than I'd heard it in months. "You should see what Julia's done with her parents' beach house," Evelyn said, directing the comment at Daniel. "She's turned it into an absolute showpiece. Remember how you always said that place had so much potential?" "You renovated the Hamptons house," Daniel asked, leaning forward with interest. "Just some updates," Julia said. "I kept the bones the same. You know how I loved that wraparound porch where we used to—" She stopped, glancing at me with what looked like embarrassment but felt like calculation. "Sorry, I shouldn't monopolize the conversation with old stories." "Please, don't stop on my account," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "It's fascinating to hear about my husband's past." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Evelyn's eyes glinted with something that might have been approval not for me, but for the way the evening was progressing according to her design. "Rachel's right," she said, standing with her wine glass in hand. "Perhaps we should focus on the present and the future." She moved to the center of the room, commanding attention with the natural authority of someone who'd been born to lead. The candlelight cast shadows on her face that made her look both regal and predatory. "I wanted to take this moment, while we're all together, to share some wonderful news," she began. "As you know, the Carter Foundation has been looking for someone to head our new medical research initiative. It's a position that requires not just expertise, but a deep understanding of our family's values and vision." My stomach lurched. I knew where this was going before she even said it. "I'm delighted to announce that Julia has accepted the position. She'll be moving back to Lakewood permanently next month." The room erupted in congratulations. Patricia actually clapped. Marcus raised his glass in another toast. Julia's parents beamed with pride. And Daniel sat there looking stunned, his eyes darting between Julia and his mother. "You didn't tell me," he said quietly. "I wanted it to be a surprise," Evelyn replied smoothly. "Julia and I have been discussing it for weeks. The foundation needs someone with her international experience, her connections. She'll be working closely with the board. Of course, very closely." The emphasis on those last two words was subtle but unmistakable. Julia would be working with the Carter family. She would be at every board meeting, every charity function, every family gathering. She would be woven back into the fabric of Daniel's life in ways that would be impossible to untangle. That's wonderful, Daniel managed, but his voice was strained. Congratulations, I said, the word tasting like ash. What a perfect fit. Julia's smile was triumphant, despite her modest expression. I hope we'll be seeing a lot of each other. Rachel, I know how important it is to Daniel that everyone gets along. Oh, I'm sure we'll all be one big happy family, Patricia said with barely concealed glee. I looked around at the table at their faces, some satisfied, some gleeful, some carefully neutral. Only Daniel seemed uncomfortable, but even his discomfort felt weak, ineffectual. He wouldn't stand up to his mother. He never had. To Julia, Evelyn said, raising her glass once more. Welcome home. Everyone raised their glasses, even me, though my hand shook slightly. As I drank, I caught sight of our reflection in the dining room mirror, all of us arranged around the table like pieces on Evelyn's personal chessboard. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been taking notes all evening. Every sleight, every maneuver, every carefully orchestrated moment. They thought they were watching me crumble. What they were really watching was me learning the rules of their game. And once you know the rules, you can start planning how to break them. To Julia, I echoed, my voice steady now. And to surprises, after all, Thanksgiving would be boring without them. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly at my tone, perhaps sensing something she hadn't expected resistance. Good. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder what the outsider might do when pushed too far. The dessert course arrived with all the fanfare of a coronation. Evelyn's prized pumpkin souffle, a recipe she claimed had won competitions but never specified which ones, was presented on individual crystal plates. The serving ritual gave her another opportunity to hold court, and she seized it with practiced ease. Julia, you must tell Rachel about the charity gala in Geneva, Evelyn said, her voice carrying that deceptive sweetness that preceded her sharpest cuts. The one where you raised $2 million in a single evening? Julia waved her hand dismissively, but her eyes sparkled with pride. It was a team effort. Besides, I'm sure Rachel has her own impressive achievements. Corporate law must be so demanding. The pause before demanding stretched just long enough to transform the word into something else entirely. Predictable, mundane, ordinary. Everything Julia wasn't. It has its moments, I replied, carefully setting down my dessert spoon. Though I imagine it's different from what you're used to. We deal with reality rather than charity galas and tax-deductible donations. A silence fell over the table. Marcus actually looked impressed by my small show of spine. Patricia seemed torn between offense and entertainment. But it was Julia's reaction that surprised me most. She smiled, a genuine expression that made her even more beautiful. Touché, she said, raising her wine glass toward me. I forgot Daniel mentioned you had fire. He always did like women who could challenge him. Used to, Evelyn corrected, her voice cutting through the moment. Daniel used to like challenges. Marriage tends to cure men of that particular appetite. The implication hung heavy in the air that I'd somehow domesticated Daniel, made him less than he was. That with Julia, he'd been more adventurous, more alive. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me, but said nothing to defend me or our marriage. Speaking of challenges, Julia continued, her tone light but her eyes fixed on Daniel. Do you still play piano? I walked past that little jazz club on Meridian Street yesterday, Morrison's. Is that still your Thursday night spot? My blood chilled. Daniel hadn't been to Morrison's in over 2 years. He'd told me he'd lost interest in playing publicly, that work had become too demanding, but the way his face lit up at the mention suggested otherwise. You still remember that? He asked, his voice soft with nostalgia. How could I forget those nights when you'd play The Way You Look Tonight and dedicate it to— She stopped herself again. That perfectly timed pause that was more effective than finishing the sentence. Well, ancient history, as I said. Not so ancient, Patricia interjected with a sly smile. Daniel was just there last month. Richard saw him performing. I turned to look at my husband, who suddenly found his dessert plate fascinating. Last month, when he'd said he was working late on the Henderson acquisition, when I'd brought dinner to his office only to find it dark and empty. You're playing again, I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the betrayal burning in my chest. Just occasionally, he mumbled. It's nothing. Nothing. Evelyn laughed, the sound like crystal breaking. Daniel's music was never nothing. Julia understood that. She never asked him to choose between his passions and his responsibilities. I never asked him to choose, I said, my control finally slipping. Didn't you? Evelyn's eyebrow arched. Marriage is all about choices. Dear, some wives understand that supporting a husband means encouraging his gifts, not scheduling dinner at 8 sharp every evening. Mother, Daniel finally said, but it was weak, obligatory. I'm simply saying, Evelyn continued, that Julia brought out the best in Daniel, the musician, the adventurer, the man with ambition beyond billing hours and mortgage payments. Julia had the grace to look uncomfortable, but she didn't protest. Her parents watched with the fascination of spectators at a blood sport. You're absolutely right, Evelyn, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Julia clearly brought out something in Daniel, the ability to lie, apparently, though I suppose that's a skill that runs in the family. The table erupted. Patricia gasped. Marcus laughed out loud. Evelyn's face flushed with anger. But I wasn't done. Tell me, Julia, I continued, turning to face her directly. When exactly did you and Evelyn start planning your return? Was it before or after she started moving family assets into that new medical research initiative? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks less like a homecoming and more like a carefully orchestrated coup. Rachel, Daniel's voice was sharp with embarrassment. You're being paranoid. Am I your mother announces a position that didn't exist until recently, perfectly tailored for your ex-girlfriend, who just happens to return from Switzerland at exactly the right time, and you're playing piano at the same club where you used to serenade her, lying to me about it. Julia stood gracefully, her composure never wavering. I think perhaps I should go. This is clearly a family matter. Sit down, dear, Evelyn commanded, and Julia obeyed immediately. Rachel's just having a moment. We should be understanding. Not everyone is equipped to handle the complexities of families like ours. Families like yours, I repeated, standing slowly. You mean families built on manipulation, lies, and the kind of casual cruelty that you've turned into an art form. How dare you, Evelyn began, but I cut her off. I dare because I'm not blind. Evelyn, I see what you're doing, what you've always done. You couldn't stand that Daniel chose someone you didn't handpick, so you've spent 7 years trying to break us apart, and now you've brought in reinforcement. I looked at Julia, who had the decency to appear uncomfortable. I hope the position pays well, Julia. You'll earn every penny being Evelyn's puppet. That's enough, Daniel said, standing as well. But instead of defending me, he turned his disappointment in my direction. You're embarrassing yourself. Those 3 words hit harder than all of Evelyn's barbs combined. My husband, the man who'd promised to stand by me, was siding with them. The betrayal was complete. You're right, I said quietly. It is enough. I placed my napkin on the table with deliberate calm, though my hands shook. Thank you for dinner, Evelyn. It's been illuminating. As I walked toward the door, I heard Evelyn's voice, triumphant and cold. Let her go, Daniel. Some people simply don't belong. They never learn their place. I stopped at the threshold, turning back to see them all, the Carter family, in all their toxic glory. with Julia already being absorbed back into their ranks like she'd never left. "You're right about one thing, Evelyn," I said. "I don't know my place in your family, but I'm about to find out exactly where I stand in the real world, and when I do, you might not like what I discover." I left them there, their silence following me into the cold November night. But as I called an Uber, my mind was already working, already planning. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea what they'd actually done was wake me up. Daniel didn't come home that night. His text arrived at 11:43 p.m., curt and cold. "Staying at my parents'. We'll talk when you've calmed down." When I've calmed down, as if I were a child having a tantrum rather than a wife who'd just discovered her marriage was built on shifting sand. I sat in our living room, still in my burgundy dress, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so happy then, so convinced that love would be enough. By 2:15 a.m., I'd moved from hurt to anger, and from anger to something sharper curiosity. I opened my laptop and began searching. Julia Sanders, the Carter Foundation, Medical Research Initiative. The breadcrumbs were there, scattered across press releases and social media posts, waiting for someone to follow them. The Carter Foundation's board meeting minutes were public record, a detail Evelyn probably hadn't considered, given her assumption that I'd never look. There it was, dated 6 weeks ago. Proposal for new medical research division, pending candidate selection. But Julia's LinkedIn showed she'd updated her location to Lakewood 3 months ago. She'd been in town, planning this, while I was sleeping next to a husband who knew and said nothing. The next morning, I called in sick to work the first time in 3 years. Instead of nursing my wounds, I drove to the county clerk's office. If Evelyn was moving assets, there would be paperwork. There always was. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Brenda, recognized me from previous corporate filings. "Working on Saturday after Thanksgiving. You lawyers never rest," she said with a sympathetic smile. "Important case," I replied, which wasn't entirely a lie. The property records revealed the first piece of the puzzle. 3 properties previously held by the Carter Family Trust had been transferred to a new entity, Riverside Medical Holdings LLC, just 2 weeks ago. The LLC's registered agent, Julia Sanders, but she wasn't listed as a member. That honor belonged to Evelyn Carter and someone named Harrison Blackwood, a name I didn't recognize. I photographed everything, then moved on to the corporate filings. Riverside Medical Holdings had been created 4 months ago, long before the Foundation's board officially proposed the Medical Research Division. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. My phone rang. "Daniel." "Where are you?" he demanded. "Your office said you called in sick." I needed some air. "We need to talk about last night. Your behavior was completely unacceptable." "My behavior?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Daniel, when were you going to tell me you've been playing at Morrison's silence?" "Then, it's not what you think. It never is." "When are you coming home?" "Sunday. Mother thinks we need space." "Mother thinks," I repeated. "Of course she does." After hanging up, I made another call. This one to my friend Sarah, a forensic accountant who'd helped on several cases at the firm. "I need a favor," I said. "Off the books." Sarah didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" We met at a coffee shop downtown. I showed her what I'd found, and her expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the documents. "This is sophisticated," she said. "They're using the LLC to shield assets from the main family trust. But here's the interesting part." She pointed to a line in the operating agreement. "This requires unanimous consent for major decisions. If Julia's not officially a member but is the registered agent, she's essentially a figurehead. Evelyn maintains control. So Julia's being used too? Possibly. Or she's complicit. Either way, there's something else." Sarah pulled out her tablet and showed me a financial disclosure form. "Harrison Blackwood. He's under SEC investigation for insider trading. If Evelyn's in business with him..." My pulse quickened. She wouldn't know about the investigation. It's not public yet. Exactly. But the question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? I thought about Daniel, probably sitting in his childhood home, being comforted by his mother while she painted me as the villain. I thought about Julia, so confident in her victory. Most of all, I thought about Evelyn, so certain she could manipulate everyone around her without consequence. I'm going to wait, I said finally. Let them think they've won. The Foundation's gala is in 3 weeks. Julia will be formally announced then. Sarah raised an eyebrow. And I'll be ready with questions about their new partner that Evelyn won't be able to answer. Publicly. That evening, alone in our empty house, I found more pieces of the puzzle. Daniel's email was synced to our shared computer. He'd never changed the settings. There they were, messages between him and Julia dating back 2 months. Nothing explicitly romantic, but the familiarity was there, the inside jokes, the remember when conversations that cut deeper than any affair would have. One email stood out, dated 3 weeks ago. Danny, Julia had written, using the nickname I'd never been allowed to use. Your mother's right. We were good together. Maybe we were just too young to appreciate what we had. I know you're married now, but some things are worth reconsidering, especially when the fit was never quite right to begin with. Daniel's response was what broke something inside me. It's complicated. Rachel's a good person, but you know how it is. Sometimes good isn't enough. Mother keeps saying I settled. Maybe she's right. Settled. 7 years of marriage reduced to a single word. I'd been the consolation prize, the placeholder until the real thing came back. I printed everything: emails, property records, corporate filings, SEC documents. Then I locked them in the safe in my home office, the one Daniel didn't know the combination to because he'd never asked. Sunday arrived with Daniel's key in the door at 4 p.m. He looked tired, conflicted, but not apologetic. We need to talk, he said. Yes, I agreed. We do. He sat across from me, not beside me. The distance felt deliberate. Mother thinks. I don't care what your mother thinks, I interrupted. I want to know what you think. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. I think you overreacted. Julia's just taking a job. You turned it into something bigger. Did I, or did your mother, Daniel? They've been planning this for months. I have proof. His face shifted, a flash of something guilt before settling into defensiveness. You went snooping. I went looking for the truth. There's a difference. This is exactly what Mother said you'd do. Turn everything into a conspiracy. Make yourself the victim. I studied his face, looking for the man I'd married. He was there, somewhere, buried under years of maternal manipulation and his own weakness. Do you still love me? Daniel. The question hung between us. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Of course I do. But he'd hesitated. That small pause told me everything. You should know, I said carefully, that your mother's new business partner is under federal investigation. If she proceeds with this initiative, with him involved, it could destroy the Carter name. Daniel's face paled. You're lying. I'm a lawyer, Daniel. I don't make accusations without evidence. The 3 weeks leading to the gala became my war room period. During the day, I maintained the facade of the dutiful wife trying to salvage her marriage. Daniel had moved back home, but we were strangers sharing a house, polite and distant. He spent most evenings at his parents' or working late, or so he claimed. I didn't bother checking anymore. My real work happened after dark. Sarah had uncovered more about Harrison Blackwood shell companies, suspicious transfers, a pattern of fraud that went back years. But the masterpiece was an email chain between Blackwood and Evelyn, discussing preliminary allocations of foundation funds before the medical initiative was even approved. They were planning to siphon money from the charity into their private LLC. I documented everything meticulously, creating copies and backup files. My laptop became a treasure trove of evidence that could destroy Evelyn Carter's carefully constructed empire, but I needed more than documents. I needed witnesses. Margaret, the Carters' housekeeper, had worked for the family for 15 years. She'd always been kind to me, offering small smiles when Evelyn's back was turned. I found her at the grocery store one Tuesday evening. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, surprised. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better, Margaret. Could we talk privately, over coffee at a quiet diner?" Margaret's story poured out. She'd seen it all the other women Evelyn had driven away from Daniel, the financial manipulations, the cruel games. But what she told me about Julia shocked even me. "She never went to Switzerland for work," Margaret said quietly. "She left because of the scandal with that married senator. Mrs. Carter paid for her to disappear until things cooled down. Now she's back because Mrs. Carter promised her more than just a job." "What do you mean?" Margaret looked around nervously. "I heard them talking. If Julia can break up your marriage within 6 months, she gets a $5 million bonus from the foundation. It's all been arranged." My hands trembled as I recorded her testimony on my phone. "Would you be willing to say this publicly?" "I'm retiring next month," she said. "My daughter lives in Florida. After I leave, I'll tell anyone who asks." The next piece came from an unexpected source, Richard, Patricia's husband. He appeared at my office on a Thursday afternoon, looking uncomfortable. "I shouldn't be here," he began. "Then why are you—" He shifted in his chair. "Because what they're doing isn't right. Patricia. She goes along with everything Evelyn says, but this has gone too far." He handed me a flash drive. Security footage from the house. Evelyn had cameras installed everywhere except the bedrooms. She reviews the footage to gather information on everyone, but she doesn't know I have access to the system. The flash drive contained hours of footage, including a conversation between Evelyn and Julia from the week before Thanksgiving. They were in Evelyn's study, discussing their plan in detail. "Daniel's always been weak," Evelyn said on the recording. "He needs someone strong to guide him. Rachel was a mistake, but mistakes can be corrected." "And you're sure he'll come back to me?" Julia asked. "He never really left, dear. He's been waiting for permission to admit it." I also found footage of Daniel from 3 months ago, meeting Julia for lunch when he'd told me he was in depositions. They were laughing, his hand briefly touching hers across the table. Not quite an affair, but close enough to shatter what remained of my heart. The final piece of my plan required help from an unexpected ally, Marcus. Daniel's brother had always been the family cynic, watching their dynamics with detached amusement. I approached him at his office, a sleek, modern space that reflected his tech entrepreneur status. "Rachel," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I wondered when you'd come." "You know what they're planning?" "Of course. Mother's not as subtle as she thinks." He studied me with sharp eyes. "The question is, what are you planning?" I told him about the evidence, the fraud, the investigation. His expression shifted from amusement to genuine interest. "You could destroy her," he said simply. "I could, but I need something from you." "Which is?" "Access to the gala's presentation system. I want to ensure certain documents appear during Evelyn's speech announcing Julia's appointment." Marcus laughed, a genuine sound of delight. "You're going to expose her at her own party in front of 300 of her closest friends and associates. She humiliated me at Thanksgiving. It seems only fair to return the favor. The difference being," Marcus noted, "that your ammunition is legal evidence, not just casual cruelty." Exactly. He agreed to help, partly out of his own resentment toward his mother's manipulations, partly because he admired the strategy. "You know this will implode everything," he warned. "The family, the foundation, possibly Daniel's career if he's implicated." "Daniel made his choice," I said, surprised by my own coldness. "He stood by while they destroyed me. Now he can stand by while I return the favor." The week before the gala, I had my attorney not from Ashford and Blake, but a friend from law school who specialized in family law prepare divorce papers. I also contacted a reporter from the Lakewood Tribune who'd been investigating foundation fraud for months. She was very interested in my information. I scheduled everything perfectly. The divorce papers would be served to Daniel at his office the morning of the gala. The reporter would receive the full dossier an hour before the event, and Marcus would ensure that the most damning evidence would appear on screen just as Evelyn stood to make her grand announcement. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I called Julia and asked to meet for coffee. She arrived looking confident, even sympathetic. "Rachel, I'm glad you called. I've been hoping we could clear the air. Have you—" I stirred my latte slowly. "Tell me, Julia, when you were in Switzerland or wherever you actually were, did you ever think about the collateral damage of your return?" Her mask slipped slightly. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean destroying a marriage for money. $5 million, I heard. That's the going rate for breaking up a family these days." Her face went pale. "How did you—" "The same way I know about Harrison Blackwood's investigation. The same way I know about the fraudulent transfers from the foundation. The same way I know about your real reason for leaving town 3 years ago." I leaned forward. "You see, Julia, while you and Evelyn were playing chess, you forgot that the pawns could learn the game too." "You can't prove anything," she said, but her voice shook. "I can prove everything, and in 72 hours, everyone in Lakewood will know exactly who you are and what you've done." I stood to leave, then turned back. "You could have had him honestly. If you'd come back and he'd chosen you, I would have stepped aside. But you had to make it a game. You had to make it cruel. That was your mistake." As I walked out, I heard her calling someone Evelyn. No doubt. Let them panic. Let them scramble. They had 3 days to wonder what I would do, to realize that the woman they'd dismissed as beneath them had been preparing for war. The night before the gala, I stood in my closet, selecting my outfit. Not burgundy this time. Black. Elegant, expensive, and perfect for a funeral, the funeral of the Carter family's reputation. Daniel came home late, finding me in my office, reviewing my notes one last time. "The gala's tomorrow," he said unnecessarily. "I know. Are you coming?" I looked up at him. This man I'd loved, this weak, conflicted creature who'd chosen comfort over courage, wouldn't miss it for the world. The gala was held at the Riverside Country Club, a monument to old money and older prejudices. I arrived alone at 8:15 p.m., fashionably late enough to ensure most guests were already there, already champagne soft and ready for a show. The valet who took my keys did a double take everyone knew about the Thanksgiving incident by now. I walked through the grand entrance with my head high, my black Versace gown making me feel like an avenging angel. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and ego. 300 of Lakewood's elite gathered to celebrate Evelyn Carter's latest triumph. The reactions to my presence rippled through the crowd like waves. Whispers followed my path to the bar, where I ordered a martini and turned to survey the room. Evelyn stood near the stage, resplendent in silver, holding court with the mayor and several foundation board members. Julia floated nearby in ethereal blue, playing the role of golden girl to perfection. Daniel stood between them, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, or perhaps it was my presence making him shift nervously. "Rachel," a voice called out. It was Harrison Blackwood himself, approaching with the confidence of a man who had no idea his world was about to implode. "I heard you were Daniel's wife. Pleasure to finally meet you." I shook his hand, noting the Rolex, the perfect teeth, the eyes that didn't quite focus properly cocaine or prescription pills. Probably, "Mr. Blackwood, I've heard so much about you." "All good, I hope." He laughed at his own weak joke. "Oh, absolutely fascinating," I replied. "Your work is about to become very well known." He preened, missing the edge in my voice entirely. Behind him, I caught Marcus's eye. He gave me the slightest nod. Everything was in place. At 8:45, dinner was served. I was seated at table 12, exile territory, with distant cousins and plus ones no one bothered to remember. But I had a perfect view of the stage and the main table where the Carter family held court. I picked at my salmon, watching Daniel lean over to whisper something to Julia. She laughed, touching his arm. Evelyn beamed at them like a conductor watching her orchestra perform perfectly. The Tribune reporter, Sandra Kim, was there too, seated with the press table. She caught my eye and tapped her phone. She'd received my package and was ready. At 9:30, the speeches began. The mayor praised the foundation's work. The hospital chief thanked them for their generous donations. Each speaker built toward the crescendo Evelyn's announcement of the new medical research initiative. Finally, at 9:52, Evelyn took the stage. The room fell silent, trained by years of social conditioning to give her their complete attention. "Good evening, dear friends," she began, her voice carrying that perfect blend of warmth and authority. "Tonight marks a momentous occasion for the Carter Foundation. We stand at the threshold of a new era in medical research, one that will save lives and cement Lakewood's position as a leader in healthcare innovation." The screen behind her lit up with the foundation's logo. Marcus was at the control booth, waiting for my signal. "To lead this initiative," Evelyn continued, "we needed someone extraordinary. Someone with international experience, unimpeachable credentials, and a deep understanding of our our foundation's values." A few chuckles at her deliberate slip. I stood up quietly, moving closer to the stage. Several heads turned to track my movement. "It is my great pleasure to announce that Julia Sanders will be taking the helm of this vital project." Applause erupted. Julia stood, gracious and glowing. That was my cue. I raised my phone, sending the pre-typed message to Marcus, "Now." The screen behind Evelyn flickered. The foundation logo disappeared, replaced by the first document, the LLC filing showing Harrison Blackwood's name. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, not yet noticing the screen, "we've partnered with Harrison Blackwood's investment firm to ensure—" She stopped. Someone had gasped, pointing at the screen. She turned, seeing the document, then the next one that appeared, the SEC investigation notice. "What is this?" she hissed into the microphone. More documents appeared in rapid succession, the fraudulent transfers, the email promising Julia $5 million to break up my marriage, the security footage transcript of Evelyn calling me disposable and discussing how to remove the obstacle. The room erupted in chaos. Board members stood, shouting questions. The mayor stepped away from the main table as if distancing himself from contamination. Harrison Blackwood's face went from red to white as he saw his own emails displayed for everyone to read. "Turn it off," Evelyn commanded. But Marcus had locked the system. The evidence kept coming, each slide more damning than the last. I stepped forward, my voice carrying across the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, you should know that this information has also been provided to the Tribune and the SEC. I thought you deserved to see what your donations have been funding." "You." Evelyn's mask finally cracked completely, her face contorting with rage. "You vindictive little—" "Careful, Evelyn!" I interrupted. "You're being recorded. Again." Sandra Kim had her phone out, live streaming everything to the Tribune's website. Other reporters, sensing blood in the water, did the same. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the screen showing Julia's email about their lunch dates, about how she was working on him and he was already wavering. "Daniel knew nothing about this," I said clearly, for the record and the cameras. He was as much a victim of this manipulation as anyone. His only crime was weakness and misplaced trust. It was a kindness he didn't deserve, but it would keep him from being destroyed completely. I wasn't cruel like his mother. Julia tried to flee, but found her path blocked by reporters firing questions. "Miss Sanders, is it true you accepted a bribe to seduce a married man?" Harrison Blackwood was on his phone, probably calling his lawyer. Too late. The FBI would be calling him within hours. But it was Evelyn I watched. Evelyn whose destruction I savored. She stood on the stage, her empire crumbling, her reputation in ruins, her carefully maintained facade shattered beyond repair. She looked at me across the chaos, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw fear in her eyes. "Why?" she asked, the microphone catching her broken whisper. I walked closer to the stage, making sure everyone could hear my answer. "You taught me, Evelyn. All those dinners, all those cutting remarks, all those lessons in cruelty, you taught me how your world works. The difference is, I learned to use the law instead of manipulation, truth instead of lies." I turned to address the room one last time. The Carter Foundation has done good work in the past. I hope it continues to do so under new leadership, real leadership, ethical leadership. Then I walked out, my heels clicking on marble, leaving 300 witnesses to Evelyn Carter's complete humiliation. As I reached the door, I heard Daniel calling my name. I didn't turn around. He'd received the divorce papers that morning, though in the chaos, he'd probably forgotten. Outside, the valet brought my car. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, from friends, from numbers I didn't recognize. Tomorrow, the story would be everywhere. The Carter name would be toxic. Julia would be unemployable. Harrison would be arrested, and me, I was free. The aftermath was swift and merciless. By midnight, the Tribune's website had crashed from traffic. By 6 a.m., the story was picked up by national news outlets. Carter Foundation scandal fraud, bribery, and family betrayal, read the headlines. Harrison Blackwood was arrested at his home at 7:30 that morning, reporters capturing his perp walk in high definition. I watched it all from my hotel room I'd checked into the Lakewood Grand after the gala, not wanting to return to the house I'd shared with Daniel. My phone hadn't stopped ringing, but I answered only one call from Sarah, my forensic accountant friend. "You did it," she said, admiration clear in her voice. "You absolutely destroyed them." "I told the truth," I corrected. "They destroyed themselves." The Foundation's board called an emergency meeting that morning. By noon, Evelyn had been removed as chair. The medical initiative was suspended pending investigation. Julia's name was withdrawn from all consideration, and according to my sources, she'd already booked a flight to Europe running away again, just as she had before. Daniel appeared at my hotel room that afternoon. The manager called to ask if I wanted to see him. After a moment's consideration, I agreed. One last conversation to close this chapter properly. He looked haggard, aged 10 years overnight. His perfect hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. For the first time since I'd met him, Daniel Carter looked broken. "Was any of it real?" he asked without preamble. "Our marriage, our life together, was any of it real to you?" "I loved you," I said simply. "Every day for 7 years, I loved you. The question is, was any of it real to you? Or was I always just the placeholder until Julia came back?" He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I don't know. God help me. Rachel. I don't know anymore. Mother always said, 'Your mother is facing federal charges.'" I interrupted. "Maybe it's time to stop caring what she says." "She's still my mother. And I was your wife. Which one of us deserved your loyalty?" He couldn't answer that, which was answer enough. "The divorce papers are straightforward," I continued, my voice professional now. "I'm not asking for alimony. I don't want the house too many ghosts. I just want this to be over." "What about us?" he asked, looking up with desperate eyes. "What about fixing this? There is no us, Daniel. There never really was. There was you, your mother, and the idea of Julia. I was just furniture in that arrangement, something you acquired but never truly valued." "That's not true. Isn't it name one time you stood up for me against your mother? One single time you chose me over her wishes?" His silence stretched between us like an ocean. "I thought so." I stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Sign the papers, Daniel. Let's both move on." He stood too, pausing at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." "So am I," I said. "I'm sorry I wasted 7 years believing you could be the man I thought you were." After he left, I sat by the window watching the sun set over Lakewood. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Mother's having a breakdown. Patricia's in damage control mode. Foundation's assets are frozen. You really did it. Congratulations. Warrior. I smiled. The first genuine smile I'd felt in weeks. Then another text. This one from Margaret, the housekeeper, saw the news in Florida. About time someone stood up to her. Enjoy your freedom, dear. The next morning, I submitted my resignation to Ashford and Blake. Staying would have been awkward for everyone. But I already had 3 job offers from rival firms, all eager to hire the lawyer who'd taken down the Carter empire with nothing but evidence and courage. I chose a position with Brennan and Associates, a firm known for taking on corporate corruption cases. It felt fitting. A week later, I stood in the empty house one last time, collecting the last of my belongings. The divorce papers had been signed and filed. Daniel hadn't contested anything. The house would be sold, the proceeds split evenly, clean, simple, final. As I walked through the rooms, I remembered the woman who'd lived here. The one who'd spent hours agonizing over which dress to wear to please a mother-in-law who would never approve. The one who'd swallowed insults and smiled through humiliation. The one who'd believed that loving someone enough could make them love you back properly. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone harder but more honest. Someone who understood that respect couldn't be earned from those determined to withhold it. Someone who knew that sometimes the only way to win a rigged game was to flip the board entirely. I left my keys on the kitchen counter and walked out without looking back. As I drove away, I passed the country club where the gala had been held. They were already removing the Carter Foundation plaques from the wall. By next month, it would be as if they'd never existed. My phone rang Daniel's number. I let it go to voicemail. Then Julia's number appeared. Block. Delete. Evelyn tried next, probably calling from jail where she was being held pending bail. I turned the phone off entirely. The highway stretched ahead, leading away from Lakewood and toward whatever came next. I had savings, skills, and for the first time in 7 years, self-respect. The Carters had tried to break me with their wealth and cruelty. Instead, they'd taught me my own strength. As I drove toward my new life, I thought about Thanksgiving again, how Evelyn had stood with her wine glass, so confident in her power, so certain she could orchestrate everyone's lives like pieces on her personal chessboard. She'd never imagined that one of those pieces would learn to play better than her. A toast, I said aloud to no one, raising my coffee cup as I drove, to justice served cold, to truths revealed, to women who refused to know their place. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere behind me, the Carter dynasty was crumbling, their name forever tainted by scandal. Julia was fleeing the country in disgrace. Daniel was alone in his childhood home, finally free from his mother but too weak to know what to do with that freedom. And me, I was driving toward tomorrow with nothing but possibilities ahead. They'd tried to serve me humiliation at their Thanksgiving table. Instead, I'd served them consequences at their own gala. The meal had been long overdue, but the taste of victory was worth the wait. My phone, turned back on at a rest stop, showed 53 missed calls and over 100 messages. I deleted them all without reading. The past was done. The future was mine. As I crossed the state line, leaving Pennsylvania behind, I allowed myself one last thought about the Carters. They'd wanted me to disappear, to accept my unworthiness, to fade into nothing. Instead, I'd become the architect of their downfall. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting gone, but making sure they never forget why you left. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was entirely mine to travel. No more Thanksgiving dinners from hell. No more mother-in-law manipulations. No more husband who couldn't choose his wife over his mother. Just me, the open road, and the sweet satisfaction of a game well played. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts and experiences. Sometimes the best revenge really is success. And I'd love to hear your take on standing up to toxic family dynamics. Until next time, remember you're stronger than those who try to break you.